August 13, 1926. Orient Province, Cuba. In the depths of a plantation empire ruled by sugar and sweat, a child is born who will one day challenge the might of empires and become one himself. A sprawling plantation, Spanish columns, dark wood, servants whisper. At the head of this kingdom sits Fidel Castro, a ruthless Spanish immigrant who clawed his way to power. A man who sowed control like crops and reaped wealth. Fidel Alejandro Castro Ruz, illegitimate, ambitious, and born to contradiction. His father, Angel, a soldier turned sugar lord. His mother, Lena Ruz, once a maid in the household. Fidel was the product of power and defiance. Classrooms echo with Latin prayers and discipline. Fidel, now a wiry adolescent with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, challenges his teachers. The Jesuits teach him rigor, structure, and something more dangerous, how to argue. In Havana, Fidel absorbed the soul of Cuba's elite and the pain of its people. The capital was a theater of hypocrisy, casinos and brothels for Americans, hunger and rot for Cubans. At the University of Havana, he entered the crucible. Surrounded by radicals, gangsters, and ideologues, Fidel discovered his weapon, the word. And then, the gun. Cigarette smoke curls in a dimly lit room. Student activists plot revolution. A young Fidel stands and delivers a thunderous speech. His charisma is undeniable. But beneath it, a hunger, not just to change the system, but to control it. In the streets, Fidel was just another rebel. But in his mind, he was already a ruler. He saw the republic not as broken, but betrayed, and knew that betrayal required vengeance. Fidel travels to Colombia, witnesses a coup. He joins attempted uprisings in the Dominican Republic. Everywhere he goes, instability follows. He thrives in it. His early missions failed, but failure never deterred him, because Fidel understood something others didn't. In chaos, power isn't found, it's taken. The courtroom murmurs with disbelief. Fidel, now a young lawyer, freezes. Batista's coup is a turning point. Democracy died in 1952. Batista returned like a ghost from Cuba's past, this time without pretense. He seized the state and sold its soul to Washington. For Fidel, it was the final betrayal. He drafts a legal brief denouncing the regime. It is ignored. He petitions courts. Doors slam. The law has failed him. He realized what every tyrant in the making eventually does. When institutions are hollow, only force fills the vacuum. He closes his law books forever. The lawyer became a soldier, and the soldier would become a tyrant. Fidel walks alone, Havana bathed in twilight. The camera pulls wide. One man, caught between justice and power, preparing to ignite history. July 26, 1953. Santiago de Cuba. A convoy of cars races through the pre-dawn silence. Inside, young revolutionaries wear stolen uniforms. Their hands tremble around weapons. At the center of it all, Fidel Castro, calm, focused, already turning himself into legend. This was his first gamble with destiny. The attack on the Moncada barracks was audacious, reckless, and doomed. Most of the attackers were killed or captured. The dream lay buried beneath bullet casings and blood. Fidel, bruised but unbroken, sat in his prison cell. By candlelight, he began to write the words that would echo through history. With 5 words, he turned defeat into defiance. His trial became a pulpit. His prison cell, a forge. He served 22 months. Then, under a political amnesty, he was freed. Exiled to Mexico, Fidel began again. In a smoky cantina in Mexico City, 1955, Fidel met a wiry Argentine doctor, Ernesto Che Guevara. It wasn't a meeting, it was a merger of flames. Fidel brought the vision. Che brought the will to burn everything down. They gathered maps, weapons, volunteers. The 26th of July movement was reborn, this time in exile. December 1956. 82 men boarded the yacht Granma, bound for Cuba's southeastern coast. Only 12 survived the landing. They vanished into the thick green jungle of the Sierra Maestra. There, a new kind of army was born, built not on uniforms, but conviction. What followed was guerrilla warfare, ambushes in the night, sabotage under the sun, leaflets fluttering over villages, Fidel broadcasting to the nation through a rebel radio. In the Sierra Maestra, Fidel became more than a man. He became a story, the bearded warrior who defied tanks with words, who promised bread and sovereignty to the forgotten. In Havana, Batista, bloated with power, paranoid with fear, tightened his grip. Mass executions, corruption. The United States began to waver. With every act of Batista's cruelty, Fidel's legend grew stronger. Each bullet fired by the regime was another verse in his scripture. In village squares, Fidel kneeled beside peasants, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His smile, revolutionary. He offered clinics, schools, land, promises that sounded like gospel. The people didn't see a tyrant in waiting. They saw a liberator. Fidel's war wasn't just fought with bullets. It was fought with myth. On the final night of 1958, Batista fled. No last stand. No heroic exit. Just a plane, suitcases, and silence. January 1st, 1959. Havana erupted. Rebels marched. Civilians cheered. Flags waved. The revolution had won. Cuba's future had arrived. Bearded, charismatic, unstoppable. Fidel Castro stood atop the ruins of an old regime, ready to build a new one in his image. He appeared on the balcony of the presidential palace, arms raised, thunderous applause echoing like thunder. But behind the smile, something darker stirred. Power, once taken, rarely lets go of its captor. The fire in the mountains had become a fire in his veins. Early 1959. Inside the presidential palace, Fidel Castro paces the marble halls. Outside, crowds chant his name. Inside, his pen races, signing decrees, reshaping a nation. Batista was gone. The revolutionaries now held power. But Fidel didn't just want to fix Cuba. He wanted to remake it, entirely, and in his own image. At the Ministry of Agrarian Reform, everything moved fast. Documents flying, landowners shouting, soldiers standing by as thousands of acres were seized and redistributed. Land for the peasants, schools for the poor, clinics for the sick. On paper, paradise. But beneath those promises, something darker began to stir. Night after night, Fidel appeared on television. Hours-long broadcasts. He stared straight into the camera, speaking not just as a leader, but as a prophet. Fidel, the revolution is not a bed of roses. It is a struggle between the future and the past. Charismatic, ubiquitous, unrelenting, Fidel became the sun around which Cuba revolved. And in that light, dissent began to wither. As the months passed, the revolution hardened. Political opponents were arrested, or simply disappeared. Newspapers were shut down. Revolutionary tribunals delivered swift, final justice. Former comrades sat in prison cells, staring at stone walls. Outside, gunshots echoed into the night. The revolution had begun to devour its own children. To question Fidel was to betray him. And soon, Cuba spoke with a single voice, his. At the gates of the U.S. Embassy in Havana, long lines of Cubans waited for visas. A Marine lowered the American flag. Relations with the United States were collapsing. The Cold War had found a new stage. Washington saw a dictator. Fidel saw an opening. In 1960, inside the Kremlin, Fidel stood beside Nikita Khrushchev. Cameras flashed. Vodka flowed. The Soviet Union welcomed Cuba with open arms. In exchange came oil, wheat, and weapons. Then, 1961, the Bay of Pigs, gunfire, smoke, exiles charging the beaches, only to fall. It was a US-backed invasion and a humiliating failure. But for Fidel, it was vindication. David had stood against Goliath and survived. Still, the price was steep. Paranoia became policy. Across the island, interrogations intensified. Surveillance grew. Informants multiplied. Trust became dangerous. The revolution built schools, but silenced poets. It gave healthcare, but stripped freedoms. It lifted the poor, but jailed the skeptical. In his office at night, Fidel sat alone, staring at maps and dossiers. The world was watching. He lit a cigar, smoke curling like secrets into the dark. To some, he was a hero who defied empires. To others, a tyrant wrapped in olive green fatigues. But to Fidel, history was not to be observed. It was to be commanded. Somewhere in the countryside, under a fading sun, a peasant walked past a billboard. Socialism or death. The mask of the liberator had slipped, and in its place, the unblinking gaze of a ruler who had no intention of letting go. 1962. The globe spun on a wire. One breath too loud, one move too bold, and history would end in ash. At the center of it all, Fidel Castro, son of sugar fields, lord of revolution, and now, a match in a room full of powder. Across the Cuban countryside, long Soviet missiles were dragged beneath palm fronds. Camouflaged crews unloaded crates marked in Cyrillic. After the Bay of Pigs, after betrayal and blood, Fidel no longer wanted survival. He wanted deterrence, revenge, immortality. Inside Havana's Soviet embassy, Fidel paced like a general before war. His terms were bold, his tone furious. Khrushchev listened by phone as Fidel welcomed America's fear. To protect his revolution, Fidel was willing to gamble everything, even thermonuclear annihilation. The world called it madness. Fidel called it strategy. In the United States, sirens screamed. Spy planes soared. President John F. Kennedy stared at reconnaissance photos. Cuba was armed, and the clock was ticking. 13 days of terror. A tiny island of 7 million people had become the fulcrum of the world's fate. And Fidel? He didn't flinch. He demanded a first strike. In Moscow, Khrushchev hesitated. Then, he blinked. He ordered the missiles removed. Fidel was not consulted. Once again, betrayed by empire. In silence, he watched Soviet ships retreat. The missiles packed like ghosts. The Cuban Missile Crisis made him a global icon and a paranoid sovereign. He had stared down two superpowers, but trust had vanished from his world. Back on Cuban television, Fidel's speeches grew longer, louder, darker. 4 hours. 5. Sometimes 6. His voice became gravel and thunder. Fidel, voiceover. Cuba no se rinde. Cuba no se vende. Cuba lucra. Cuba does not surrender. Cuba is not for sale. Cuba will fight. Narrator. The revolution now wore a steel mask. Military tribunals expanded. Informants spread through neighborhoods. Independent newspapers vanished, replaced by state bulletins. Che Guevara left for Bolivia and met a bullet. What began as liberation now smelled of suppression. Dissent became treason. Doubt, a punishable offense. In 1980, Fidel opened Cuba's gates, not in mercy, but in defiance. Over 125,000 Cubans fled during the Mariel boat lift. Doctors, artists, students, entire families. Fidel called them escoria, scum. Inside interrogation rooms, a dim bulb swung. A poet, a priest, a professor. Their crime? Thinking aloud. Prisons overflowed. UMAP camps re-educated homosexuals, artists, and critics. In the shadows of reform, Fidel built his own inquisition. In schools, children recited from textbooks. Fidel es nuestro padre, nuestra voz, nuestro guía. Fidel is our father, our voice, our guide. He replaced God with the state, and then replaced the state with himself. A nation once brought to its knees by Batista, now knelt to a different Messiah. But Fidel's ambitions stretched far beyond his shores. In his study, a map of Africa lay open. His finger traced Angola. Tyranny at home was not enough. He exported revolution to Angola, Mozambique, Ethiopia. Black Cuban soldiers marched through African jungles under Caribbean banners. Helicopters lifted off from red soil. Fidel called it solidarity. Critics called it imperialism in disguise. But to him, it was legacy, a global footprint of fire. In Moscow, 1985, Gorbachev rose. Perestroika began. The Soviet Union began to thaw. Fidel tightened. Reform was betrayal. Dissent, sabotage. As the world moved forward, Cuba froze in place. The streets of Havana dimmed. Food lines stretched around corners. Electricity failed. The revolution, once full of promise, now offered only ration books and ghosts. 1991. The Soviet Union fell. And with it, Cuba's lifeblood. Fidel had survived assassination plots, invasions, and isolation. But now came a quiet killer: collapse. On Cuban streets, buses stalled. Bicycles replaced cars. Families boiled sugar water for dinner. Shelves stood bare. Lights went out. It was called the special period in time of peace. Fidel's euphemism for famine. A nation of ration books. And whispered desperation. In Havana, a mother served soup made from banana peels. A child stared into a dark television. Calories dropped by half. Weight by more. Doctors called it ideological starvation. When pride refuses to eat its mistakes. Inside the palace, Fidel hunched over a map. A candle flickered beside a fax machine. He refused to bend. The world evolved. Fidel entrenched. While others reformed, he rebranded Marxism as martyrdom. Cuba wouldn't break, but it would bend. In 1994, thousands gathered along the Malecon. They chanted for freedom. Some leapt into the sea. Others were beaten. It was the Maleconazo uprising. Fidel appeared in person. He didn't fire bullets. He waved. The crowd hesitated. The protest died. Desperation became exodus. Rubber rafts. Inner tubes. Tens of thousands fled across the Florida Straits. Many never reached shore. At home, surveillance swelled. Intelligence agents traced phone calls. Built walls of faces. Artists. Poets. Teachers. Watched. Catalogued. Silenced. The people withered. The state grew fat. Without Soviet oil, the factories died. Tractors rusted. Fields returned to oxen. Fidel declared it an ecological victory. The truth? Regression, masked as revolution. Then came the tourists. European dollars flowed, but not to Cubans. Inside gated resorts, foreigners sipped mojitos. Outside, children begged for soap. A two-tier nation emerged. One with hard currency, one with nothing. Fidel appeared on television in a crumbling suit. The fire in his eyes, dimmer, but still burning. Fidel, voiceover. Cuba will never kneel. We would rather eat roots than swallow the venom of capitalism. Narrator. He preached defiance, but ruled through contradiction. Foreign currency was welcomed. Religion, once banned, was tolerated. Even the Pope came to Havana. At Revolution Square, Pope John Paul II blessed the crowd. Fidel stood nearby, respectful, but guarded. The man who once hammered faith, now shook hands with heaven. It was not repentance. It was tactics. But time, his final enemy, could not be jailed, censored, or exiled. His beard grayed. His gait slowed. Yet his grip remained iron. Cracks began to show. Dissidents spoke on pirate radio. Underground art spread. The internet seeped into Havana's corners. A new generation rose, with questions the revolution could not answer. And Fidel? He spoke longer, as if volume could drown the future. In 2006, he vanished from the podium. A brief statement cited illness. Raúl took his place. But the truth? The Comandante saw the stage was changing. Cuba grew quiet. No sirens. No marches. Just stillness. His image faded from the billboards. He had not died, but something had. His omnipresence.